Welcome to the Mother-Daughter-ish podcast. It's your mama's favorite podcast.
And the podcast your daughter always wanted.
This is Miss Dawn.
And Aungelique.
From the 713. Houston, y'all. Get connected and stay connected weekly as new shows debut on Sunday, Wednesday, and please check out our Saturday Out and About showcases.
Enjoy the show. Please subscribe, like, share, comment, and tell every woman on the planet that you know about our show.
Here's our show for today. Happy May the 29th. On today's show, I am solo, and I wanted to just talk about something that made me think about it. I got a DM from one of our listeners, and they said, hey, I found your podcast because I was looking for a podcast, that pertained to women and mothers and daughters and all that, and they found our podcast on YouTube, and they said, your podcast was the first podcast I ever listened to on audio and on YouTube. Usually I'm listening when I'm in the car. So I was like thinking about that. And I said, what was the first podcast I ever heard? And I'm going to tell you, in 2014, when I started my podcast, I started looking up other people's podcasts to just see who was out there and what was out there. And I discovered there was a podcast for every single thing in the world you could think of. And the very first podcast, and I remember where I was and what I was doing. I was in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I was in an apartment that I had there because I was there for business. So I had an apartment and an office there. And I was putting away some things in the kitchen. And I grabbed my iPhone 5. Yes, I had an iPhone 5 in 2014. So I grabbed my iPhone and I was like, where's the podcast on the phone? So, of course, I Googled it and it said it was the purple button. So I clicked on the purple button and I don't know how I find it. I don't know how it found me. But I found a podcast called Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend. And I was like, okay, that sounds cute. And so I put the podcast on and I put my headphones on and, I work a little bit faster when I've got some white noise in the back. I've got like music or audio book or anything in the background that I can just kind of hear that noise as I'm working. It helps to make me, move a little faster. And also classical music makes me think deeper and better. And when I'm writing books and different stuff, I'm listening to classical music because it just really helps my brain. But anyway, I'm putting away the things in the kitchen and organizing and all of that, and I was listening to Allison Rosen, and I guess I was years off. I didn't know that it had already been going on, but at that time in 2014, for me, I don't know about for others, but podcasting had just gotten really, really popular. Everybody wanted to do it. I was just done with a TV show that I was doing called The Fob's Business Review, and it was broadcast in all of Houston and some outskirts. And I was just, finishing with that after 3 years and was like, what, I really should do podcasting because I can do that from anywhere, anyhow. I don't have to get made up to do it, except for if you're going to be on, at that time, it was Skype. I had Zoom, but I didn't use it. I was really connected to Skype because that's what everybody at that point was using. Now I realize it doesn't really matter what everybody's using. You have to use the platform that works for you. And so the first podcast I ever heard was Allison Rosen. In our comments, tell me, what's the first podcast you ever heard, whether it was on audio or if it was on video, if you saw it and listened to it. Because what happens is that a lot of people will put their audio up and then they'll create a video just so you can have a visual, especially if they're trying to show you something or introduce you to somebody or something like that. But Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend was my first podcast. And, even today in 2022, whenever I'm on a road trip or something, I'll go find her podcast and look at the topics and see if it's something that I want to hear. But I found it to be interesting. I found it to be entertaining. I found it to be something that I hadn't I didn't have to commit to pen and paper, meaning that every now and then they threw out some nuggets that I wanted to go and check out, but I could write it down quickly. But you know how sometimes you listen to a podcast and it's so educational that you literally feel like you're in a class? Those I have to be sitting down intentionally listening to that podcast, which takes away real significant time when I want to multi and triple task. But when I listened to Allison Rosen, it made me laugh. I got connected to the people that were on the podcast. Not connected as like I felt like I knew them, but like I knew their cadence. I knew, things that they would say. I knew when they were going to be funny. I knew, if they were talking about something serious, when one left the podcast to move on to other ventures, it was like, oh, I'm going to miss, Greg or whoever. She had other comedians that were on her podcast. Because it is a lot of satire, it is a lot of comedy, it is a lot of in your face, it is a lot of very different conversation. But that is the first podcast that I ever listened to, and that was in 2014. Now, when I press my little purple button, I probably have over 1,200 different podcasts. And I'm going to tell you the reason I have so many. One of the reasons I have so many podcasts on my device is because I want to support other people's podcasts. So I'll go and I'll sign up. It doesn't mean that I'm listening to you every single day. It doesn't mean that. But I'm going to give you that subscription because I know numbers matter. And that's one of the reasons why we ask those that listen to our podcast as well to subscribe to our podcast, because it does help us on the other end. I know you look at it and you go like, well, podcasting is free. You can just get on and start talking. Well, no, you actually have to pay for web hosts. You actually pay when you go do out and about excursions. You actually pay when you need help from people. You pay for your graphics. You pay for your marketing. You pay for everything. So every little bit helps. And if a subscription is going to help so that, we get paid on the other side of it, then every little bit helps. So when I meet people, especially if I go to podcast events or something, I go right to their podcast and I subscribe because I know how important it is. I do it on YouTube. I do it on iTunes. I do it on iHeart, wherever they ask me. And everybody has their own spot where they have traffic. But wherever they ask me to join is where I join, just out of courtesy, out of respect, and out of honor, just to show that, I want them to bring in whatever it takes for them to bring in to do what they need to do to be happy. And that's how I feel about this podcast as well, is that, I want people to subscribe. I want you to listen. I want you to share and comment and let us know. But today I want you to comment and tell me, what was the very first podcast that you ever heard and you got so attached to it and loved it so much that you still honor it and go back to it? Just a few days ago, maybe a couple days ago then, I listened to an Allison Rosen podcast about camping. So I'm pretty up to date, as far as listening to different ones. Then I went back and listened to another one where she was interviewing some guy. I forgot his name, but it's the most recent one they had up there last week. But every now and then I go there and I'm familiar with her voice. I'm familiar with, her talking about her kids. I'm familiar with some of the people on there. I'm familiar when her husband is on there. I'm familiar. And I'm like, every time, it's so funny. Every time I turn on that podcast, I go, that's the first podcast I ever listened to. Yeah, I had heard of other people's podcasts, and yeah, I knew that people were podcasting. All of that I knew. But because I think it was that I was falling into that space of wanting to get into podcasting and broadcasting, radio and all of that, it became more important for me to start listening. And as I got more involved with things like Podcast Movement and VidCon and Podfest and all of that, and start meeting more podcasters, it just became more important why we should, in a podcast community, connect with other podcasters. So that's all I wanted to share today, was to just share with you how it all happened as far as like me listening to my first podcast. And I would love to know what your first podcast was. And I hope it's one that I like and I can enjoy and I can join and subscribe to it as well. I have many favorites, but that's the first one I ever listened to in the space of podcasting, and knowing that podcasting was going on. That was the very first one that I subscribed to and started listening to. It's called Allison Rosen, and it's Alison Rosen with Rosen, is your new best friend is the name of it. It's pretty quirky and funny, and I like it. And I consider myself kind of particular, but this podcast It's really fun. I have a lot of business podcasts. You can go to the purple button on your phone or iPad or whatever, and you can look up very specific. So if you're looking up things for pets, you can look it up. If you're looking up things for hair, you can look it up. If you're looking up things for healing, you can look it up. If you're looking for things for meditation, you can look it up. Like, for example, I follow on iTunes Dr. Mike Murdoch. He gives a lot of wisdom tips. And so every now and then when I need a quick tip, I just go and I listen to his podcast as well. You have a lot of sermons from different pastors that are on podcasting. You have a lot of old school, like one of my old schools that I have on my podcast. I love listening to Wayne Dyer. I have to be in a mood, but I like listening to Wayne Dyer. So I follow Wayne Dyer's podcast and I get all of his old nuggets. I've got a lot of his CDs and books and audio and cassette tapes and all that stuff. But to be able to just at the click of a finger on a purple button, listen to him is very, very good. You have a lot of entrepreneur tips for podcasts. You have a lot of magazines that have an actual podcast. You have just a lot of people out there that are podcasting that you can listen to and even connect with on the other end as well. So that's our show for today. I just wanted to share with you what my first podcast was that I listened to. Now I want to hear from you about what your first podcast was. Again, if you want to support the show, you can support it in many ways. You can do something as simple as go to our IG page at mother_daughter_ish, and you can click on there and subscribe to follow us, and we'll follow you back. Also, you can go to YouTube. If you're here, go up to the subscription and click on subscribe and hit the little notification bell so you'll know when we have new shows coming out. We have them coming out every Sunday. We have them every Wednesday and Friday and Saturday. So Sunday and Wednesday are going to be conversations about just anything. And then Friday is going to be our showcase where we showcase small businesses and things that we've gathered from those businesses or things we've been given or sent. And then on Saturday is our out and about. We're somewhere doing something, somewhere doing something, in some city, some state, some country. It's summer, coming up. So, hey, that's what we're out there doing. Everybody's back outside, but we're still being careful and we're still wearing our mask and we're still putting on our gloves to put gas in the car and things like that. So we're still being careful, but also living life as well. So also, if you want to support the podcast monetarily, the CashApp is $mdipodcast, and we accept donations of any amount, and that helps to keep the podcast going as well. Our website will be up pretty soon, here probably this month sometime, and we'll have a lot of information over there as well, different things that we'll be involved in, and speaking engagements, and how to book us for your events and things like that. So thank you for listening today. And don't forget to tell me about what first podcast, not which ones you listen to on a daily basis, but what was your first podcast? Again, mine was Allison Rosen is your new best friend. That's our show for today. Bye.